George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Death in the afternoon it was in Islamabad, mass murder most foul. A massacre in broad daylight on camera. The heroic Pakistan army reduced to a gang of hired killers defending an oligarchy that came straight from the front pages of the Police Gazette, the Interpol wanted list. And has the killing stopped in Lebanon, or has it merely paused? The United States has demanded that Zelensky lower the age of soldiers conscripted in his army to teenage boys. Well, that's what you're paying for. And 2.6 million people have now demanded in a petition a new general election in Britain. It's all coming up here on the mother of all talk shows. It's going to be a bumpy night. How could it be otherwise? Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
There have been many other massacres in Pakistan carried out by their own army, an army which is idolized by millions and which has intensively undermined the confidence of the nation in it over these last 12 months or so. I came in to Pakistan politics in the 1970s when a general arrested the then Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and hanged him on trumped-up charges because Mr. Bhutto wanted a transformation in the setup in Pakistan, the disinheriting of the oligarchy which had ruled since independence, and above all, putting the armed forces in their place. So they murdered him. It's amazing that they haven't yet murdered ImranKhan, who equally wishes to transform, revolutionize the sclerotic, decrepit, broken down and utterly corrupted institutions of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, which has become a mockery of everything that it claimed to be, a mockery of everything that Mr. Jinnah declared that it would be. The leader of the masses, ImranKhan, has not yet been killed, but maybe hundreds of his supporters were killed yesterday. Not content with blocking the roads, cutting off the internet, stopping social media platforms from operating in the country, not content with the myriad of disappearances, false imprisonments, fake charges, and all the other paraphernalia of soft dictatorship, they realized that this crowd that was descending on Islamabad contained within it the numbers and the determination to sweep them away, to sweep their leader, ImranKhan, out of prison and back into his rightful place in the Prime Minister's house, after which they feared his revenge would be condign, after which they feared that all the crimes they'd committed against him, against his wife, against his relatives, against his party men, and against Pakistan would have to be reckoned with. So the stakes were high, and therefore the reaction, the last gasp reaction of the Pakistani generals was to order their soldiers to open fire on the people who had admired and loved them all of their lives. But the risk is now that the stakes have been raised so significantly that only a full-scale, all-out revolution, which sweeps away all of these generals. I've known these generals. They presented me with awards, bent over double with the weight of their medals on their chests, unearned except if you count murdering your own leaders and murdering your own people as a proper role for a military. The moment will come when the Pakistan military will crack, when the ordinary Jawan will refuse orders to fire upon his own neighbors, upon his own people, his own classmates, and maybe even his own family. There's only so much killing of your own people that you can order your military to do. We've seen that before. The Shah of Persia was all powerful. The Shah of Shahs. He had the most fearsome security service in the entire world, the SAVAK. He had millions of soldiers holding rifles that fired 6, 10, 12 bullets each. But the moment comes when the soldier realizes that he's already fired 10 shots. And in another 2, he will be quite disarmed. And that in front of them is a crowd of thousands of the enragés, of the enraged, who will tear him to pieces, limb from limb, when he runs out of ammunition, and maybe even before that. That's the place we are now in Pakistan. I have been involved in the country, as I said, from the 1970s in defense of the life of the aforementioned Mr. Bhutto. We all failed. He was hanged, and he left a political dynasty. His daughter, Benazir, was my close friend for many decades. I was with her, at her side, during dark days and fine. I make that point to underscore the point I always make. I am not a supporter of ImranKhan's party, the PTI. I never have been. In other circumstances, I would have been campaigning for his opponents in the Pakistan People's Party. ImranKhan's a friend of mine. I admire him. But I'm not his party man. I'm not his political supporter. But he is the legitimate Prime Minister of Pakistan. He was removed from office in an American organized coup because he said the 2 words, absolutely not. When asked by the Americans if he would allow American bases, CIA bases in the country, the better to make war against the people of Afghanistan, he answered, absolutely not. It didn't help that he was in Russia on the day that the invasion of Ukraine began and made it plain and obvious that he would not be joining any anti-Russian front. So the Americans decided to overthrow them. So I'm not a supporter of the PTI, but I am a supporter of Pakistan. And one of my high civil awards is for my work on the movement for the restoration of democracy in Pakistan. I can't have been in favor of democracy in Pakistan in the 1970s and 80s and be against democracy now in 2024. So I have no alternative but to stand with the masses on the march for the restoration of democracy in Pakistan from the very same generals and oligarchs that I opposed all those decades ago. The question of what happens next will turn on how strongly the generals especially the Chief of Staff, Munir. I won't give him his further titles. He doesn't deserve them. Whether he decides that he's willing to wade through an ocean of his own countrymen and women's blood in order to continue to protect a coalition government imported from exile and straight off the page of the Police Gazette of the Interpol wanted list of crooks and comic singers. The decision will, of course, be made in Washington. The government of Pakistan and the army leadership in Pakistan are entirely beholden to the United States. Just like the Egyptian army, they are bought and paid for, and the person who owns them, the power that owns them, keeps them not to confront the nation's enemies, to defend the nation's borders. If that were so, the Egyptian army would have been engaged more than 14 months ago against the mass slaughter just over a small wall on their own borders, but they are not, because their owners don't pay them for that. And the same is true of the government of Pakistan and its armed forces. So what the incoming administration of Donald Trump will have to work out, how expensive will it be to allow this oligarchy and these tin pot army generals to massacre maybe millions of their own people? Will they be swept away, and will the price of that be deemed too high? We'll be talking to a man who knows just in a few minutes about that. Much of the news is on the ceasefire that the apartheid state, Netanyahu, has concluded with the Lebanese state, such as it is. The ceasefire does not, of course, include the Lebanese resistance, because they have been helpfully deemed to be a terrorist organization that may not be powwowed with and may not be in any way glorified by me, for example. Were I to glorify the Lebanese national resistance, I would be arrested and charged, because this is Britain in 2024. So if I can, very carefully, avoid any glorification, let me say that this represents an historic victory again for the Lebanese resistance, which has again driven the Israeli forces from their land, which has again fought the Israeli forces to a standstill, killed, wounded, and destroyed substantial elements of their ground force invasion and their war materiel, and again is able to say that Israel was unable to capture a single village or a single town in more than 40 days of pouring scores of thousands of their men into the maw of the war in the south of Lebanon, and they completely failed. As of yet, it's not illegal in Britain to disrespect Netanyahu. But if the reports that the Israeli army itself is seeking to assassinate Netanyahu, a theory advanced by no less than Mrs. Netanyahu, who has publicly said so, that there is a military coup coming in Israel, I say, what took you so long? I say, that's probably the only way out, because the armed forces are fighting for an inglorious, dishonorable, disreputable, crooked, wretched criminal, Netanyahu. And he's not worth the bones of a Pomeranian grenadier. So there's no political alternative to Benjamin Netanyahu. All of the other politicians are even worse than he is. And so it seems to me that only an intervention by the Israeli armed forces can possibly save the entire region from an all-consuming regional war, which might quickly become World War III. Because if, as Netanyahu claims, he has paused firing in the north with the Lebanese resistance to concentrate on the threat, as he describes it, of Iran, well, you better batten down the hatches, because the threat from Iran hasn't gone away and may even be in the skies tonight. The threat from the axis of resistance hasn't gone away. The threat from the mere existence, never mind resistance, of the Palestinian people hasn't gone away. And if it is the intention of Netanyahu to exercise the Samson option, then all of us are finished. Because Iran, right now, this night, undeclared, has hundreds of nuclear weapons. They multiplied their highly enriched uranium stocks last week. They said, Larijani said, in response to a claim by the IAEA that it would only take them 48 hours to put that highly enriched uranium on the tip of a missile. Larijani corrected them and said it will take us 24 hours. And those 24 hours have elapsed. Iran now has a strategic military agreement with both China and Russia. It now has at least as many nuclear weapons as Israel has. So if Netanyahu wishes to unleash the dogs of war and cry havoc, and if, as has been promised, the American and British governments go to war on Netanyahu's behalf, despite the fact he's a wanted criminal that they will have to arrest if he turns up in their capital cities. Work that one out. Explain that one to your children as they are sent off to war for Netanyahu, the wanted criminal. If that happens, then the ball, as we say in Scotland, is on the slates. There's no going back from that. You cannot unsee it. You cannot unhear it. You cannot unfeel it. My last words of scorn in this monologue are for the pompadoured victim of child sexual abuse, Emmanuel Macron. I call him so because his school teacher interfered with him in the classroom when she was his teacher, now his wife. There are some who claim the story is even more colorful than that, but who am I to pry into a French boudoir? What I do know is that this Macron is so puerile. He announced not 5 days ago that France would arrest Netanyahu if he arrived. He couldn't explain the conundrum either of how he was going to continue giving weapons to a man he was publicly pledged to arrest on war crimes charges and charges of crimes against humanity. But 5 days ago, Macron said France would do its duty by the International Criminal Court. Today, he declared that he would not do so after all. Today, he declared that Israel is not subject to the International Criminal Court because it is not a signatory to it. But neither was Russia. That didn't stop them issuing arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin. That didn't stop the French government seizing Russian assets, even though they were not a party to the ICC. Neither was Syria, but that didn't stop them pouring billions into a regime change operation which continues to this day in the Syrian Arab Republic, and it certainly didn't stop the government of France from deploying a raft of sanctions, including property seizures of Syrian officials, including the President Bashar al-Assad. The depth of the hypocrisy of these people has reached the stage where even their own families must be laughing at them, must be asking them, wait, what? Israel can't be arrested because they're not in the ICC, but Russia must be arrested even though it is not in the ICC. How can any sane, rational person, never mind the educated, cultured French, accept such an absurdity? Well, so far, they are. We'll be talking about it with Ghadi Francis, no less, in the second hour of the show. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I'm told Donald Trump likes that trailer very much, and I'm told he's asking who is mimicking him there. Shall I tell him? Will Netanyahu sabotage the Lebanon ceasefire deal? Yes or no? 26,609 of you have voted. It's a yes-no question. You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream if you're watching us on the YouTube stream. Please share with all of your friends that we are live and kicking right now, shooting from the hip, shooting from the lip. We're also broadcasting live on TikTok. Who'd have thunk it? And for the first time, I think, we're broadcasting live on Instagram at the same time, as well as Rumble and X and so many other platforms, some of which I never knew existed. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the United States and Canada. The number is +1 844 944 3344, and it's free of charge in the United Kingdom and Ireland, where our number is 08081 965522, and the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Get hitting the phones. Adil Raja is a retired Pakistani army major. He's a journalist and a whistleblower and a regular guest on the mother of all talk shows throughout this period of emergency, which Major Raja has now reached its zenith, I would have thought, or could it get much worse even than this?
Well, George, you never know with Pakistan. Thank you so very much for inviting me. And it's always a pleasure to be at your show. But right now, it's a very sad moment for my country, which is facing its general CC movement, actually. The Islamabad massacre, as it is called, I mean, a peaceful protest, George, is the right, basic human right, right? But in Pakistan, in my country, only might is right. And the Pakistani military junta, I mean, they've got the might, and they think they're right. I mean, they have carried out a regime change operation backed by the Biden administration, and ever since the country is a slow-moving train wreck. And they've tried everything, but they've failed to, run the economy of the country. So they are trying to bring in the investment, but the country is going down the drain. They've got a crime family right now leading the country, and they are collaborating. The the military junta, the generals, they are supporting the regime there. And this year, on the 8th of February, there was a vote, there was a general election in Pakistan. 85% of the country voted for ImranKhan, who is currently in jail for almost 1.5 years for calling for the democratic right of the entire country, calling for reforms in the judiciary. So he's facing hundreds of trumped up cases, as it happens in a third world country, as it happens in dictatorships being sponsored by Washington, D.C., by the deep state of the Washington, D.C. But, there's a twist in the tale now. Trump is coming back, and I was listening to that ad, and I was really, I was enjoying that. So the Trump factor, George, that is really scaring the Pakistani generals now. What they did yesterday in Islamabad, they've killed hundreds of peaceful protesters. They have fired directly at them. And that's not the end of it, George. They've stolen the dead bodies of the protesters because they are scared of showing the real numbers. And this is not only me saying, my sources told me, and I tweeted about it, and I talked about it in my live stream, and my live streams are getting hundreds of thousands of live viewers these days. I'm surprised because X is banned in Pakistan, and X is my main platform these days because I've been muzzled on most of the other platforms, including YouTube, by the way. But, I informed the people that the first task of the day today, after they did the massacre last night in Islamabad, and in the morning they washed the crime scene, they cleaned it. Like if you remember, once they killed Benazir Bhutto, and in the early morning they've washed the crime scene, and then once the international pressure arrived, like Amnesty International is calling for an independent inquiry. That time they called the Scotland Yard over there, but all the evidence were washed. So they've washed all the evidence, and now they have moved. And I informed everyone that, listen, they are now trying to hide the dead bodies. In the morning, their first priority is to hide the dead bodies. They're stealing the dead bodies. Guardian confirmed what I was saying. Guardian said that, listen, and Michael Kugelman tweeted it about an hour ago. He said, and he quoted the Guardian's journalist and Guardian, and the Guardian is saying it. But very nice of them to actually confirm my story. And they're saying that the record of those who have injured and who have been killed in the Islamabad massacre last night have been seized by the authorities. And once you say authorities in Pakistan, that means the feared intelligence agency ISI. Mind you, George, this same ISI dragged me 9 months of hell here in the UK through a counterterrorism investigation. They said I'm inciting violence. That ended with a no further action. And now, since UK is the libel tourism capital of the world, they have taken me to the court. They're dragging me through the courts for the last 2 years now, and they're spending huge amount of money against me just to muzzle me. I mean, but that's just me. I'm not talking about myself alone, but I am someone who is exposing this hypocrisy in Pakistan, George. Yeah, so that's what's actually going on. But they're scared of Trump, mind you, George. They're scared of Trump. They're scared because they're being sponsored by the deep state, obviously. So they're scared of how Trump is going to react. So they want to wrap things up before Trump's come in. They've been offering ImranKhan that, all right, you can go abroad, just go out, and we will handle your politics and your party the way we are already doing that. The ImranKhan's weakness is the Trojan, or I mean, more than one Trojan in his parties. They're his biggest weakness right now. I mean, the people of country is supporting him. They've killed, hundreds have been killed, George, just last night on ImranKhan's call. But the Trojans in his own party called off the protest without even consulting with him, and he's in jail. They're controlling the flow of information to him, and they're controlling what he says and what comes out of the jail. But that's Pakistan for you, George. But they want to wrap up everything before Trump come in, because Trump has got a sort of a personal rapport with ImranKhan as well, George.
Yes, you've answered one of the questions I was about to ask. Is it over for now? You've said that the people inside the Trojan horse called the thing off after all these deaths. Maybe that was the right decision. Maybe it was not. I don't know the relative balance of power and force and the state of morale within the army nearly as well as you. But my second question is, why are they doing this? Why is the army taking the risk of destroying forever the sacred bond between the army and the people? I've never understood it myself, by the way. The level of idolatry about an army leaves me quite cold, but I'm willing to testify that the vast majority of Pakistanis love their army with all of their being. Why is the army risking all of that by massacring their own people in the afternoon?
Well, George, that used to be the case, all right? That people used to love army. Now they hate it. The love had been replaced by hate. And I can assure you that, because you can just carry out a basic survey. I've got my hand on the pulse of the country right now. And I mean, you'll find people coming and commenting over here, other than those media cells who've banned X in Pakistan, but they're still using VPNs, like the Prime Minister himself. The puppet Prime Minister and puppet government is using VPNs to use X to give out their narrative. But the general population of Pakistan now hates their army, and in 2 years, everything has changed. Why they are doing it, George? It all comes down to personal interests of the generals at the end of the day. The generals themselves, they're committed gross human rights violations, like the regime change operation. They have killed activists. They have murdered journalists like Ashad Sharif. They've carried out massacres like the Islamabad massacre yesterday was happening in Islamabad at the same time, or in the tribal areas toward the Afghanistan border. There were a massacre by the army gunship helicopters were spraying bullets on the villages, entire villages, because there are riots going on over there. There's sectarian violence over there. So their answer to that is to fire upon them with gunship helicopters. And there is a war within going on in Pakistan, which following the textbook, they would like to call it an insurgency, because they don't want to legitimize the war. So they call it insurgency, obviously, something we've learned from the Brits. So there is a war within going on, but it has never happened in the capital city. But it did happen yesterday, and now they're trying to hide the bodies. And why they're doing it, George? Because of the vested personal interest of the generals. Because I would compare it with the Indians, by the way, because they are our rivals. The army chief who retires in India, George, he goes out and lives in a 3-bedroom apartment, maybe somewhere in Delhi. Our army chief is a billionaire in US dollars once he retires already. Our army chief, current army chief, is already, the previous army chief, General Bajwa, he's a billionaire. Before him, they're billionaires. They own islands abroad, and they say, well, that's not true. But they, even once the previous army chief's tax return got leaked, and he's a billionaire himself. From where did he make that money? From corruption. ImranKhan asks for the accountability, and they cannot afford the kind of accountability that ImranKhan asks. If there is accountability, if there is rule of law in Pakistan, the kleptocracy ruling Pakistan under the patronage of the military junta and the generals, they will all be held accountable. They'll have to be answerable to how come they've been so rich. Like the present prime minister, he was supposed to be, indicted the day before he became the prime minister, and his son became the chief minister of Punjab, and the investigating officer got killed mysteriously. He died overnight, and his post-mortem was not allowed to be carried out by the intelligence agency ISI. It's a proper mafia state, George, and personal interest have superseded national interest of Pakistan, and that is why the people of Pakistan now hate the army, and that's me saying it. It pains me to say it, George. I'm a third generation Pakistan Army officer. My father, my granddad, they were Pakistan Army officers. Myself, I've served for 21 years. And, just for speaking out these things, just to showing them the mirror, they've court-martialed me in absentia and giving me 14 years rigorous imprisonment. Why? Because I speak? Tell me, George, what I'm doing wrong over here. But that is what is going on.
Well, stay safe, and we'll talk again as this story develops. Thank you, Major Adil Raja, former Pakistan Army Major, journalist, and whistleblower, as you've heard. Let me take a quick break, and then we'll take some calls. Stay tuned. It's the mother of...
There's a group of people in Twitter who are daily posting discussions about Gaza, Lebanon, what's happening, news updates, aid for Gaza, and trying to enlist the help of Jordan and France and any other regional entity that will help get more aid into Gaza and all of Gaza, all of Palestine, for everyone who suffers. So I want to request that everyone who is listening to this go to your local council meetings and peacefully request that their representatives at the local levels do this, because it works.
Thanks for the call, Pia, in Uruguay. I'm a free man of the city of San Francisco, awarded to me for my work on Palestine, on the steps of City Hall itself. So it was a particular delight for me that the San Francisco Council voted by 8 votes to 3 to demand a ceasefire. And that decision didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of campaigning to force the local authority representatives to vote.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, most people don't seem to trust Netanyahu's role in the ceasefire deal. 26,609 of you have voted so far, and overwhelmingly you think that Netanyahu will sabotage it. Get voting on my Telegram channel, on my Twitter, my X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. Phone numbers again, toll free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344, free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522, and the worldwide number 0044 203 966 2625. Humaira is in California, but wants to talk about ImranKhan. Humaira, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George. It's an honor to speak to you, as my heart is crying.
Thank you.
And for the loss of peaceful protesters and the massacre that happened in Islamabad yesterday, and their demands were democratic. Give us our mandate back and release our leader. And that was too much to ask from these generals, of course, and the puppet regime. We are not going to sit silently, George. We are also going to reach ICJ. All the Pakistanis living any part of the world, it is now their duty to support their countrymen. Their heritage is from Pakistan. I may be living away from Pakistan over 50 years. It doesn't matter. My father was in the Air Force, and he was a good man. And many, like Raja Adil, there are good people there. But for some reason, there are spineless people now in the army who do not want to stand up to these atrocities and to this tyranny. And it has to stop. Pakistan is a very important country in that region. And it can be a great support to the Western countries because not only do we speak English, we have lived abroad, in the Western countries, and we can be an asset, not creating wars, but in creating peace in that region. Prosperity is a right of every human being. And George, I appreciate the fact that you have spoken about, prosperity and peace in the world, and you give voice to people like me. So I'm really grateful for that. But there is a message for the people of Pakistan.
Just before you come back in, I want to ask you this. I know that soldiers are trained to obey orders, but when your orders are to murder your own people, there must come a point at which the ordinary soldier says to himself, this is not right. I'm not going to do that. From your knowledge, albeit from outside, how close are we to that point?
I can't say. I was very disappointed. Maybe these are a handful of people, but my message is those who are on the ground, don't look for any leadership anymore. Become your own leaders. And stand up. Actually, the international law says you cannot take orders. It is against, the international orders or laws to take orders like that. And I hope that there are people listening in the army. How can you even face your own families? How can you go in the public now? How? These generals, they have to be prosecuted. They have to pay for what they did. This is a huge thing, and I hope that there are people in the army listening to this. And I hope they get a spine to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do this to our own family. How can anybody...
Thank you, Humera. Very powerful call. Last word, go on.
Oh, I just want to say thank you again, and I want to say thank you to Adil Raja. He has been maligned and persecuted. Anybody who's a whistleblower, gets to face that. Yeah. But we are with those people who stand up and against these atrocities.
He'll get his reward in heaven, Humera. That is for sure. He's a very brave man indeed. Now, if you want to send some comments on the YouTube channel, you just have to scan that QR code right now, and some of them we'll be able to read out. Rabia Borak, ImranKhan won a 3/4 majority, as I have been telling since the beginning. And HS says the Pakistani army is a corrupt, occupying mafia force. They plunder the country's wealth for their personal gain, and they crush their own people. And AJ Hall says the army is acting this way in Pakistan because of its psychopathic group of generals. And TW says ImranKhan was the test ground for the Trump assassination and persecutions. The US Hindu State Department was behind it. Now, since Kamala is gone, I wish Trump can see the similarity and fate of ImranKhan. And Said Tanveer al-Hassan Shah Bukhari says hospitals in Islamabad are being taken over by ISI agents, that's the Pakistani intelligence agency, only family members who are signing that their loved ones died due to vehicle accidents or falling from running vehicles are getting the bodies released. Unbelievable. Irene is on the line in England, in Hertfordshire, but on Netanyahu. This is the global university of the airwaves, after all. Go ahead, Irene.
Hi, George. Thank you so much for taking my call. It's a pleasure speaking with you. Massive fan of what you do. It's truly motivating. I'm actually an A-level politics student in year 13, and it's super interesting how my school, when Ukraine-Russia conflict began, they did an assembly focusing on like the immorality of Russia and the innocence and like victim nature of Ukraine. I asked them actually to do an assembly on the humanitarian situation in Gaza, but like they shut it down straight away. Like I feel like there was a clear political bias, and I just think it's interesting how the education system like just ensures that that bias is passed on to the students. But yeah, I just wanted to talk to you about a couple of topics. I wanted to ask you about Netanyahu's speech yesterday. He was saying that he's taken Hezbollah back by centuries since the invasion 3 months ago. I wanted to see how you viewed this. In my opinion, it's just such a illogical statement, seeing as he claims that Hamas still remains despite its small size and despite Israel having literally obliterated Gaza while slaughtering the civilians since October 7th. In my opinion, this statement just doesn't make sense at all. Like, how can Hamas still remain, yet Hezbollah has now become so defenseless in 3 months that they can call a temporary ceasefire? I heard a Sky News reporter yesterday say that Netanyahu is trying to abolish the ideology, which, as we know, is basically impossible because Hamas's ideology is resistance against Israel, which is obviously inevitable because of what he's done to the civilians. Does this mean that he's admitting to ethnically cleansing them and, like, basically, you know, as we know, committing a genocide? But the second thing I just wanted to ask you on, which, like, has really surprised me in, like, the past couple of weeks since learning about it, is just, like, the influence of AIPAC in the US. So I recently learned about the American Israel Public Affairs Committee being, like, the largest lobbyist group in America with, like, loads of super PACs, like, inside the group. They funded hundreds of millions on the 2024 campaigns, as well as hundreds of thousands on the Representative Keena Collins, just not to win her district, purely because she advocated for a ceasefire in Gaza. Like, I just think it's super interesting that Israel is not just America's ally, but it's almost like they run America. Like, they're like the same body, like they're like the same people. Like, US politicians rely on Israel for funding, and therefore they will only fund the candidates with the Zionist ideology. This is clearly, like, undemocratic and genuinely deeply concerning. Like, what kind of global superpower is politically infiltrated by a right-wing radical foreign body? I'd love to know your views.
Well, first of all, my view is that it's hard to believe you're a schoolgirl doing A-level. That was a stunning, virtuoso performance on the telephone on an international television show that will be watched by millions. So congratulations. If it was not your teachers that taught you all that knowledge, it was your parents. So my commendation to them, because they have a daughter on their hands who I'm sure will go far, and I hope you'll join us in the Workers' Party. You would be a great asset to us, and we could help you develop further. But the points that you make are all irrefutable, and it's entirely laughable to say that Hezbollah has gone back centuries. They've actually only been around for about 40 years, but he's put them back centuries, really. It didn't look like that the night before the ceasefire, when this same Hezbollah was responsible for 49 separate attacks by missile on virtually every part of Israel, on every city, every piece of infrastructure, from the airport to the harbors. That didn't look like a beaten foe to me. And of course, if they had been beaten, then Netanyahu would have stayed. He would have his soldiers camped at least along the Litani River, which separates the south of Lebanon from the rest, or even as Sharon before him in the center of Beirut itself, though some would argue he would scarcely need to do that because Netanyahu has plenty of agents there already. The idea that Israel have won the war against Lebanon is a laughable claim. And the Israelis know it. 64% of them in a poll this very evening say no to the question, did Israel triumph over Hezbollah in this war? So even the hyper-propagandized Israeli public knows the truth. And every journalist in the world knows the truth. I'm tired of people making alibis for the press corps in Western countries. That, I spoke to a very good friend of mine who was a journalist for a very long time, at a very high level, just the other day. I asked him, do these journalists talk amongst each other about the truth, or do they even lie to each other? And he said, no, they don't talk to each other, and they don't even believe that they are wrong. They don't even believe that they are lying. I've been ruminating on that for 48 hours, and I've rejected it. There is nobody working in the profession of journalism that doesn't have a base level of intellect, and most of them a high level of education. It is not possible for anybody with the IQ to be working as a journalist not to know what actually is happening, rather than what they are saying and what they are reporting. But on the point of your education system, you illuminate a very dark truth. It's not just when you start reading the gutter newspapers or start watching the gutter commentators on the television that you are being propagandized. Our children are being propagandized from the youngest age at school, even in primary school. The terms of reference, the parameters, the contours of the prevailing orthodoxy are being carefully drawn for them. And it's only remarkable young people like you, Irene, who manage to fight their way through the fog of war propaganda. And I give you my applause for that. Let's take Eve in Florida on Putin and nuclear war. Go ahead, Eve.
Hello. Yes, what I'm about to say, I think it's very dramatic, but also very clear. And I hope I will be as articulate as your young caller, your latest caller. About a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, Vladimir Putin changed his nuclear doctrine, and all the people from the media, from the alternate media, jump on that. And the bottom line is that it was not very clear why Vladimir Putin, who was winning that war in the standard way, in the conventional way, would consider using nuclear weapon, because it was not clear to me, at least. And unfortunately, 3 days ago, we got the answer, in my opinion, and it's very clear. When he demonstrated the Oreshnik system, he told the world, I don't need nuclear weapon to beat you. But when he says that, and that's what shows his great intelligence, he knew that the West would think, well, why to escalate? Because we are going to lose anyway, so let's save our military and let's go nuclear right now. The other people would think, well, let's stop because we have lost the conventional war. And this is why 2 weeks before, he told the world that he was changing his military doctrine, is because he knew that the West would panic, and he wanted to tell them, I just took the security off, I have my hand on the trigger, but I don't have any need to use nuclear power. I have all I need. And the danger of nuclear power, in my mind, today, is 100% on the West. The West will strike first. And that's what I wanted to say. And I think we have to go demonstrate. We have to start moving, because now we know clearly that the Russians, they don't need it. They have everything they need, conventional. But the West doesn't have the escalation anymore. They are going to lose guarantee. That's what I wanted to say, and I think it's very important.
Well, it's a powerful and logical case that you make, Yves. I can't deny it. It would be a very dramatic step indeed, and it would be a suicidal step, because even if they managed to kill Putin and Medvedev and Shoigu and all of the top leadership of Russia, the dead man's hand will fire all 4,700 nuclear missiles in the possession of the Russian state at predetermined targets with no human beings involved. That's their doctrine. If you don't hear from the commanders as a result of the hostile nuclear strike, fire everything everywhere. Because, as Putin said, a world without Russia is not a world worth having. And if it's without Russia, there will be no world. I hope Elon Musk can accelerate the building of his interplanetary fleet so that those at least with the opportunity to buy a ticket can get the hell out of here. I know there's actually a very significant step up either in the phenomena itself or in the reporting of the phenomena. But there's one hell of a lot of UFOs around at the moment, and most of them over strategic and military sites. Let me know if you've got a point of view on that. Now, we are on the cusp of the top 100 podcasts in the United States of America. Just imagine how many podcasts there are in the United States. It's thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. And we are right knocking on the door of the top 100. We are in the top 20 in Norway, India, and Hong Kong. And we're charting in Israel too. We are in the top 5 in Nigeria and Pakistan. It's been quite a week for the podcast. You can download it by scanning the QR code on your screen now. Now, some comments about young Irene's call. Irene, I don't have words. First-class journalism from you. Thank you, brilliant young lady. That's from Mizan A. And Chuck Naismith says, Irene is a wonderful seed. Plant more people. Please call back to GG, Irene, for the world. And Raymond says, Irene means peace in Greek. Who knew? I didn't. On the line is a legend, Sarkar in Glasgow on Ukraine-Russia. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Evening, George. Thank you so much, for taking my call. I must say, I'm calling as an angry guy, but not as a surprised guy. I'll tell you why, George. Anyone who has listened to sensible people like yourself, Scott Ritter, Douglas McGregor, knows for months and months Western boots have been on the ground in Ukraine. We have been putting Western boots on the ground in Serbia also, supposedly because we want to liberate Kosovo. Have we learned nothing? First of all, going by NATO's own doctrine, why should our NATO forces who are trained from our taxpayers' money be sent to fight over there? The young boy who got captured right now by Russians, he's not the only one. Okay, the media talking about him, but there's many more over there. Why are our forces who are suffering from PTSD, from mistakes made in 2001 Afghanistan and 2003 Iraq, why are we going on and on putting forces, boots on the ground? We are even violating our own NATO doctrine. Because Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Why are our forces on the ground? Why are these people lied to that this war started in 2022? No, not even 2014. It started in 1990, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, when no forward integration of NATO was promised. Belgrade was bombed for 80 days for no reason by NATO. 1999, Poland was added despite promising. Yeltsin was drunk. He did not understand this. Putin understands that. He doesn't want any nonsense with Russia, but we are hell-bent on provoking him. I feel bad for the guy who has been, whose name has been told by the media. But what about many others who have lost their lives from our taxpayers' money? When will this nonsense stop, George?
Well, it's a very powerful case that you make. I caution anyone against supporting British boots on the ground in Ukraine, because those who have been there in whatever capacity, for far too many of them, only their boots remained. The rest of them was carried home in the all too familiar coffins of those of us old enough to remember the carnage in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Now look, there's a NATO meeting again tomorrow night. Could hardly avoid it at this critical time. It's at 9 p.m. UK time. Aussie Cossack will be in the chair, and two great guests, Dan Kovalik, Dr. Dan Kovalik, Professor, and Dean O'Brien. NATO is giving nukes to Zelensky. That's at least the chatter. So it's Thursday night, 9 p.m. UK time, 4 p.m. New York time, 8 a.m. Sydney, Australia on Friday morning. And it's live on my channels, George Galloway channels, and the No2NATO YouTube, Twitter, Rumble, and Facebook. A quick break, and after it is the one and only Ghadi Francis, who everyone I know is looking forward to see again. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published. But actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
I've been chatting quite a bit with my Patreon supporters, long train journeys and all that. It's a remarkable thing, live chat with your patrons. You feel an obligation to go the extra mile, and I do. So if you fancy a live chat with me, you should be supporting me on Patreon. George Galloway, patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, Ghadi Francis is one of our most popular guests of all time. She's also Lebanese. She's an author, a journalist, and a war correspondent, and a regular and eloquent guest here on the mother of all talk shows. Ghadi, welcome back. These are momentous times. Our poll seems to have little confidence in this ceasefire deal. Perhaps you'd comment on the level of your own confidence about that. But say something about how this ceasefire deal came into being in the first place.
Hello, George. Today, people are resharing the last time I was with you on the Mother of All Talk Shows, where I started my bit by saying how proud I was to be Lebanese, and the deterrence was still being made on the ground. The heroic, steadfast resistance was in the actual soil of Lebanon, as we spoke last time. Today, we are speaking on a day of a ceasefire that wasn't given by a kind-hearted Israeli war criminal. It wasn't given by chance or by the charity of the diplomacy of the world that cares about us or our hospitals or our residential buildings or our capital or everybody that was killed and the bombs that were thrown and the tons of bunker busters that were raining on our cities and our homes and our villages. These did not stop because they like us all of a sudden. They stopped because they could not prevail, because they could not pass, because they could not succeed, and they could not take it anymore. They could not suffer the losses that were happening on the ground. The idea of 500 plus times of sirens in Tel Aviv is existential when we're speaking about an entity like Israel. This is what brought the ceasefire. And then I go back to the first part of your question. Do I trust it? Do we trust Netanyahu? Does anyone trust Netanyahu? Do we trust this? The world's empire is fighting these indigenous people of Lebanon and Palestine. This is a NATO-backed war on us. So do I trust that they're going to change their mind after they have comfortably lived a year of televised genocide? I don't trust them. But I definitely trust the capacity, the rooted capacity of the Lebanese people that has been proven for a third time in the most recent history just today. I believe and I trust in the potential and the military potential that the non-state actors of the axis of the resistance have proven once again. This is why I trust that new rules or regulations, at least for the time being, have been put. We don't know what happens next, though, but we know we're ready to face it when it does.
How did it happen? You've very well explained why, but how? The Lebanese armed forces who didn't fire a shot in defense of the country in my life, actually. But they actually were ringed around the village of Khayyam yesterday, and they did fire at their own people who were seeking to return to their largely destroyed and definitely damaged houses. The Lebanese government, which is scarcely a government nowadays, has no president and is a plaything for the big powers, particularly the United States and France, perhaps secondarily. But there was no place at the table for the people doing the actual fighting. So what was the mechanism by which this agreement came to be?
I think the undoing of Sykes-Picot has started a while ago in the region. And the undoing of the status quo or the rules of governance inside the shape of Lebanon have been changed and altered on the ground by the people and by the demographics and by the status quo. And this is only articulated and manifested by what you have just stated, sir. You see a Lebanese army, we don't even have a president. How is that state really working? It's very logical to ask. But this is why I think it is a time in our history, especially for veteran people who have been involved and watching closely the Palestinian and the Lebanese resistance groups for the past decades. It is a time for us in the history to look at the idea of resistance. It's not states anymore. It is non-states, if you look at it, because actually the nationalistic and the state banner for Palestine did not prove anything, especially after the normalization. This changed the actual idea that states or Arab nationalism would fight for Palestine. And ever since the 80s until today, it was non-state actors that actually took that lead. So today, I don't find it unlikely that without a government, without a president, without even the Lebanese army involved, we could see the Lebanese resistance fighting back, because this has been the case at least for the past 4 decades in Lebanon, at least, to say the least. But to explain to your viewers, sir, how did that happen on the ground? And to explain and to dismantle the idea of any Israeli victory here, because they were very good in shooting videos, but even those videos were debunked simultaneously. As soon as they were publishing videos of themselves parading in their flags in our homes and inside our villages, it was not hours after that until we had seen different videos of them being targeted. So the media warfare and the idea that they could very easily invade Lebanon was dismantled directly and on the ground by other videos and rushes from the operations and from the resistance and the resilience of the fighters in the south. And they put the target that they want to get to the Litani River, sir, after 1 year of bombing from afar and 8 weeks of trying to invade with tanks and airstrikes and missiles and intelligence, and after hitting all kinds of targets from logistics to fighters to the pager attacks. They weren't able to get anywhere inside any village and stay, and they were able to penetrate into Litani River waters exactly around 1.5 kilometers into the borders. Now, military-wise, this is nothing. And these are areas that were actually occupied within maybe hours by Israelis throughout the history. And from the military perspective, Hezbollah didn't really need to protect them to continue fighting the Israelis. So I think when they tested the waters or the grounds of Lebanon, they got the answer. They got a direct answer from these people that we're willing to take that risk and to open a war until you want. We're willing to continue having new rockets and new missiles and to get to Tel Aviv and to shower with more than 350 rockets in one day within hours. So doing that after all these weeks, I think sent the message that Benjamin Netanyahu didn't want to listen to Gallant when he said it, and didn't want to listen to his army generals or to the American negotiators. I think the rockets that the resistance rained on Tel Aviv did deliver the message that day. This is what we're living to see today.
Now, the Lebanese political scene has always been, you'll forgive the pun, Byzantine, impenetrable, very difficult to navigate with all kinds of nuance and so on. And I don't mean that in a good way. It's always been the position of Hezbollah that they could, of course, take over power in Lebanon, could have done at any time. The great majority of the population support them, but they did not want to. They had no wish to. They did not want to disturb the sectarian, confessional, and even ethnic and precarious scales of the Lebanese state. It seems to me that that must be now in some doubt, because if Lebanon doesn't have a state, but is in fact a kind of 1950s fleshpot hotel room lounge where all the intelligence agencies, all the Western spies and so on conspire against the Arab identity of the Lebanese, then maybe that's not a balance that should be retained.
Well, if I'm listening when I listen to you talk about Lebanon and the way it has been governed, this is exactly my opposition domestically in domestic politics to Hezbollah as a political party. Because we've been suffering the idea, exactly what you have very eloquently stated here. We've been suffering the idea of the local antagonizing that is happening for all our past. Their problem with Hezbollah is that the Hezb is fighting Israel. So, and Hezbollah has always been more empowered if they wanted to govern. And I think it's just something like playing in your comfort zone. Sometimes you are in a toxic relationship, but you can't get out. I think there's a kind of relationship, a formative relationship between Hezbollah and the Lebanese state. And here there is the nuance of the presence of the one and only ally, Nabih Berri, which is the Speaker of the House and a very basic and needed part to remain for the state of Lebanon in that shape. I think there is an untold alliance that was made in the 90s, and it is only time to reconsider what it has brought to these people and to that resistance, and what cons and what pros. I am one of the people that believes that any comfort zone in a toxic relationship doesn't work. It's only a matter of courage. And that toxic relationship between the Lebanese people and that sectarian regime has been botched since the Ta'if, since after the civil war. It was never actually security. It was never actually peace between people or sects, because it is a sectarian regime that remained sectarian. And even they didn't even do the whole Ta'if treaty of after the civil war. They kept parts of it to keep their positions and their power as ex-civil war lords. So in general, Hezbollah's relationship to the Lebanese state wasn't really needed until after the Syrian presence in Lebanon ended in the 2005. And they say, and they would argue, that they entered into the Lebanese state only to protect themselves. And then they would tell you that years after that, it was in the Lebanese government where the conspiracy was being held against the database of the resistance and so on. These are things that were happening in the domestic politics, sir. And they would argue, people would argue, that the presence of Hezbollah and that system is kind of protective for them and is kind of peace to ensure the Lebanese society is all like all nuances, what you try to be polite by calling nuance. All this actual sectarianism would be like under the carpet, you know, we'd hide it under the carpet and like, but it's never gonna work until you build an actual society. So in general, I would agree with you that relationship between Hezbollah and the state is not right. But I think Hezbollah, especially Sayyid Nasrallah, was in a kind of untold treaty to keep Lebanon as it is, to ensure that society, that diversity. This is the challenge of the future.
Yes, of course, that's true.
Nasrallah.
I used to say, Ghadi, in Parliament, you're talking about democracy in the Arab world. If there was democracy in Lebanon, Syed Hassan Nasrallah would be elected president in a landslide. And you don't want that. I know that you don't want that. I used to taunt the government ministers with that. Listen, a last question, if I may. It's a painful one to ask. It's a painful one, I'm sure, to answer. The usual suspects, the sectarian, the takfiri, the fanatics, whose countries and icons have not lifted one finger to defend the people in Gaza, have not supplied one gun, one bullet, 1 ounce of strength to the people in Gaza, are out today saying, we told you so. We told you that these 12ers, these Shiites, it was all performative, and they've now left the Palestinians entirely alone. They don't go on to explain, well, maybe Jordan or maybe Turkey or maybe Egypt or maybe Saudi Arabia will come to their aid. No, they know that that will not happen. But they are today dancing on the grave of the idea that the Palestinians could always count on their northern front. I know you don't speak for Hezbollah, neither of us does, but what do you think their answer to that would be?
I think they don't care about the opinions, especially of these imbeciles. And we are living in the times of actions. I don't think Hezbollah would really care to answer, especially Sayyid Nasrallah was telling the supporters throughout all the speeches during this war, don't even answer them or their narratives. But I think today a good answer would be looking at their very revered and trusted Avichai Adrai, since they do not trust the resistance or Shiites or Arabs or resistance axis, and they trust the Israelis and the Zionist propaganda. I'd like them to take a look at what Avichai Adrai said happened today. They said that they confiscated weapons being sent from Iran to Palestinians inside Judea and Samaria. This is what they call them. So in general, I'd like to take a moment to look at them. I mean, is Avichai a liar? Or is Iran sending weapons to Palestinians inside who are being harassed and who are being stranded and taken, dehumanized day in, day out? In both cases, I mean, this is an answer. But in general, Hezbollah, the society, without the tags of the religion or the sect, the Shiites have given all these stances for Palestine, and it is not uncoupled yet, and it will not end until the dismantling of the Zionist entity. They have given their 3 times of displacement and then destruction and reconstruction. They have given their sons, their husbands, their fathers, their daughters, their doctors, their journalists, their banks, their infrastructure, their roads, their universities, their schools. They have given their homes in the most beautiful villages, I'm sure, George, you have visited, in Lebanon. They have given and sacrificed their peace of mind. Trauma, again, to a new generation. All that has been given to Palestine, and we don't have this kind of relationship with Palestine. And Palestine doesn't have this relationship with us. We both know that we're fighting for ourselves against one dragon that wants to kill the future of both our communities. So we don't have this kind of exchange, who paid more. So you can only see these voices coming from people who have never fought against Israel. That's why neither the Palestinians nor the Lebanese really do care about them.
Very good answer. Thank you, as always, Ghadi Francis. A very great pleasure to see you again, albeit
Thank you,
in
George.
pretty dramatically bad circumstances. Let me take a quick break, then go to Quebec, where Yasser wants to talk about Pakistan. Stay tuned. I'll be right back.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement. A big thank you to all our wonderful listeners, as the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast is now one of the most listened to political podcasts in the entire world. We are the #1 English-speaking political podcast in the Middle East, and in the last year alone have charted in the top 10 in podcast land in Pakistan, Russia, and China. Like, rate, and subscribe to the MOATS podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to be a part of the fastest rising independent news show in the world.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will Netanyahu sabotage the Lebanon ceasefire deal? Yes or no? Almost 30,000 people have now voted, and pretty overwhelmingly they believe that Netanyahu will. If Netanyahu isn't assassinated by his own army generals, as Netanyahu's wife has now claimed is underway. Yasser is in Quebec in Canada, wants to talk about Pakistan. Why not, Yasser? Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Galloway, thank you so much for taking my call. First, I wish to thank you once again for keeping this topic alive. There are very few people in mainstream media who are covering what is happening in Pakistan. As you're well aware, there was Islamabad massacre carried out by this junta yesterday. People were shot in the head, a lot of casualties. First, I wish to take the liberty of respectfully requesting you and your team to please invite people who are insightful, informed, lucid, coherent, who can provide you much better analysis than some of the experts that are coming in to your show. One name that I'd like to specifically mention is Dr. Moeed Pirzada. I'm assuming you're already acquainted with him. He's currently in exile in Washington, D.C. He's one of the most popular chat show hosts, commentators, journalists, analysts from Pakistan, currently on the run from this military junta. Second is Ambassador Karamatullah Ghori. He's settled in Canada, career diplomat, Craig Murray of Pakistan, Karamatullah Ghori. So perhaps they can provide much more insightful, eloquent, lucid analysis than some of the guests that come on and opine on it. Second, I think I wanted to ask for your opinion on the massacre that happened yesterday in Islamabad. How do you compare that to the Rabaa massacre that happened on 14th August 2013, carried out by Abdul Fattah al-Sisi, the military dictator that was installed in Egypt? And it's been 11 years plus since that massacre. And what we saw was that massacre actually ended up entrenching and solidifying and consolidating his military rule that's been unshakable since then. Do you think the massacre in Islamabad represents a similar state of despair and hopelessness? Or do you think
the decision on that, Yasser, will be made by the masses in Pakistan. If they slump into docility, as has happened in Egypt, I'm sorry to say, then you'll have more of the same for another decade. You'll have corruption, you'll have imported foreign government, and you'll have Pakistan's continued slide towards insolvency and poverty, and a complete failure to make use of the enormous advantages that Pakistan has geographically, culturally, and religiously. So the choice will be made not only by the gunmen on the roofs wearing the Pakistan military uniforms, but will be made by the resilience, courage, determination of the masses who confront them. Now, you ask, is there a comparison between these two events? I see them as virtually identical. That's why I introduced Egypt into the discourse in my monologue. Sisi is the American-owned dictator of Egypt, and his power rests upon an American-owned army, for which the Americans pay $700, $800 million every single year. It's one of the biggest ticket items in the American aid budget, is the aid to the Egyptian government. I don't know the numbers for Pakistan, but I'm guessing that pro rata they'll be even higher. And of course, there are many other ways of rewarding the corrupt oligarchs who run Pakistan off the books of the United States. And there's places in academia, there's accommodation in Georgetown, there's a life after they leave the service of the oligarchy in Pakistan available to them. So I regard today's Pakistan and today's Egypt as almost identical in nature, with the army playing an almost identical role. Question is, are the Pakistani people more determined to stand by their leader, to overthrow their oppressor, to liberate their country from the internal tyranny under which they have suffered for so long? Are the people of Pakistan ready to make a real revolution, to change everything in the way that the Chinese people did in 1949? I mention that because Pakistan and China are close friends in all weathers, but knowing China well and knowing Pakistan well, I can't help wishing that the Pakistanis had gone down the same road as the Chinese people did at virtually exactly the same time in the late 1940s. Storm Bear says the fake ceasefire is just a time break for Israel to recalibrate. And X-Trait says it's a ploy by Netanyahu to mislead the ICC, as he knows he can't lie at the moment. He will then create an activity and either blame Hezbollah or Hamas and say they've breached the ceasefire. There is no ceasefire, of course, in either the West Bank or Gaza, please note. Crowhawk says, despite American bluster, the ICC warrants will make it incredibly difficult for Israel to obtain weapons. I suspect that's their motivation for a ceasefire. And Norm Kempkins says, it seems obvious to me that one of the Israeli stipulations for a ceasefire in Lebanon was that Netanyahu will receive immunity from France, and Macron gave in to those demands. I see that speculated on social media. Scott M. says, imagine how amazing, strong-willed, and intelligent the anti-Zionist kids in Israel are. They are being jailed for refusing military service. Gregory's on the line from the aforementioned Washington, D.C. on Putin and nuclear weapons. Let's hear from Gregory. What do you want to say, sir?
How you doing, George? Great to talk to you again. President Putin just demonstrated that there is no need for nuclear weapons. The missile he fired at that factory came in at Mach 12. There is no military on the planet that can counter the weapon that Putin fired 2 days ago. So anybody who thinks that they're just going to knock Russia over, you don't even need a warhead, conventional or nuclear, on a missile that size, impacting like Washington, D.C. at Mach 12. It would vaporize the place. So everyone should just calm down.
Yes, and that's why your compatriot, Eve, in Florida, was raising the flag earlier in the show of the danger of a NATO nuclear attack on Russia.
In his analysis.
Okay, Gregory, we've lost you, but thanks for the call. Lucy is in New York on the RSS. Let's hear from her. Lucy, go ahead.
Hi, George. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to talk quickly, I know a lot of people have been kind of boosting these new characters in the American government, in particular Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard. And the thing that people don't, I just wanted to mention this since we're talking about Pakistan and all of this stuff, don't understand about Tulsi Gabbard is that she was funded by the RSS, and she has ties to the BJP. The RSS, as you might know, is the largest fascist militant organization in the world. And I think Tulsi Gabbard kind of plays a really important role in terms of normalizing that, and in terms of organizing anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States. There are experts, especially Peter Friedrich, who I really think you should interview if you get the chance, who say that Indian Muslims and Indian Christians, that there have been calls for genocide against both of them. And it is very, very worrying that Tulsi Gabbard got nominated for Director of Intelligence. And no, it's not just because she's a Democrat. The other person that has been boosted a lot is Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy, I'm from New York City. He came to New York in July of last year, and he was palling around with Rabbi Dildo, Rabbi Shmuley, this guy, Rabbi Shmuley. And on December 11th, he's coming again because all he does when he comes to New York City is seek the financial support of Zionists with Rabbi Shmuley and with Netanyahu's son. And he's going to have an event that charges $190. And after the event, they're going to the ICC to protest the ICC's decision to put Netanyahu in jail. So I really, I'm sorry for all of these Bobby Kennedy fans. I've been following this clown's career for over the past year, and I no longer have any tolerance for this man's antics. And I just want to put it out there. Anybody that's still following this clown, Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard, to really look up your information. These people are supporting genocide, and they are in the neocon cabinet for a reason, because they are neocons. And that's all I have to say for today.
Well, you certainly put it out there, Lucy, to use your words. Some, like the curate's egg, your contribution was good in parts. but there are many other aspects of the politics of Tulsi Gabbard and Bobby Kennedy that you have merely bypassed. Not least, the Tulsi Gabbard stand against war with Russia. The Tulsi Gabbard stand against the war in Syria. The Tulsi Gabbard wish to withdraw American army bases from both Iraq and Syria. These are all very substantial points. The fact that she has ties to, or had in the past at least, ties to Hindutva fanatic organizations is obviously regrettable, but has to be balanced against these other points that I have just made. Ditto Kennedy's commitment to get to grips with the suffocating tyranny of big pharma, of big corporate interests that have made your country the sick man of the world. And his opposition to the war in Ukraine and his opposition to the dangers of World War III. These are all things that we have to balance. We can't just take one, or in your case, two of your accusations and say that that writes off these two individuals and writes off the cabinet of which they are a part, not least because they're the only two in the entire cabinet that is worth a pitcher of warm spit. The rest of them are absolute sewage. And if those two turn out to be polluted by the rest of the sewage, then you'll have been proved right. If, on the other hand, they can dilute some of the raw sewage that Donald Trump is assembling in his pond, then that'll be a good thing. We'll have to wait and we'll have to see. Lucy's in New York. Simon is in Florida. Simon from Weaponized News on Putin's visit to Kazakhstan and, well, Kellogg's for breakfast. On you go, Simon.
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. Well, it's actually a very, very busy news day. And indeed, President Putin of Russia has gone on an official state visit to the nation of Kazakhstan, where he's being hosted by their president. And they've signed no less than 19 new deals, as well as enhancing their comprehensive strategic partnership. But in their role as chairperson of the Collective Security Treaty Organization for the year 2024, the Kazakhs will actually be hosting their year-end event with all the other members tomorrow. And it's been announced today that there will be a large number of additional security agreements, because it is a security organization, that will be signed. Now, we have this occurring at the same time as Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has met with the Belarus foreign minister and announced that in December, for the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Union State Treaty between Belarus and the Russian Federation, that there will be a meeting at which 2 additional defense agreements will be signed between Belarus and Russia in the same month that we're expecting President Poroshkin to go to Moscow and sign their new comprehensive strategic partnership with the Russian Federation, which is going to be a massive, world-shatteringly huge comprehensive agreement, I would posit, between the Islamic Republic and the Russian Federation. Now, we've had Netanyahu, who specifically explained the 3 reasons why he agreed to the ceasefire deal and promoted it to the Israeli cabinet. 2 of which were he was waiting for more weapons to arrive from America, which he claimed the Biden administration had been holding up. And ironically, today, President Biden has announced that they're selling an additional 600 million worth of weapons to the Israelis. But his final and apparently most important point was he wanted to redirect attention from the north, finish off Hamas, and then focus on Iran. And it should be noted that the agreement that has been entered into yesterday with the Lebanese has a 60-day kick-in period for the Israelis to actually withdraw, which will tie in almost to the day with the inauguration of Donald Trump, who, as you jest, has now appointed as his special envoy to Ukraine, a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant General retired Kellogg. This story cannot be written on the back of a cereal package, however, because he has actually put out a large policy paper in April spelling out what he thought should be the America First policy in regards to Ukraine. And it was reported by Semaphore magazine today that that one document alone had somehow been seen by President Trump and impressed him such that 7 months later he decided to give that retired officer the role of dealing with the Ukrainians. So there's a lot of moving pieces going on. It is a very, very complex situation. And I fear that your previous guest, as eloquent as she is, was in the usual position when one is under fire, that it's very hard to maintain the big picture because you're just worried about staying alive. And possibly the reason why the Israelis have backed off the Lebanese for the time being is simply because they've been told that their long-held wish of dealing with the Islamic Republic of Iran is finally going to come to fruition, and they're far, far more focused on dealing with that situation than they are
they'll have to be very sure that they're not biting off more than they can chew on that, Simon. I suspect that they are. Thanks for that update. Now, have it out with Galloway. Why don't you? Take a look at this. Join me every week to have it out with Galloway. We discuss the great issues of the day and occasionally the odd philosophical meandering through the meaning of life. You can be on the show by contacting us at our website, haveitoutwithgalloway.com. You can be the star of the show. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, the poll has crossed 30,000, but 94, 89, 92, and 90% on the four portals believe that Netanyahu is going to sabotage the Lebanese ceasefire deal. We'll see about that. Now, I mentioned earlier there's a dramatic uptick in the number of UAPs, as the military call them, or UFOs, as Joe Public calls them, suddenly appearing in the skies over England, as well as over the United States and elsewhere. Johnny in London has called in on that subject. On you go, Johnny.
First of all, George, I would like to say utmost respect. I've got a great memory of watching you live, actually, at the Senate. I was 29 years old, a young man, got home off of my night shift, and on that day, I watched it live. And, I've heard it's been shown in schools even ever since. Now, with regards to... Yes, it's a
big deal. Thank you, Johnny.
You're welcome, and absolutely. I watch it often, in fact. And with regards to the UAPs, I will call them UAPs, because I watched on November 13th, there was a congressional committee, I believe, that discussed these entities. Now, we can all get a little bit worried about them. or whatever they are, whether they're earthbound or cosmic bound. A friend of mine said to me, hey, come on, they're quarantining us. You know, maybe there they go. We see them on the screen there now. You know, in some sense, maybe they're not exactly looking after us, but just keeping an eye on us. Back in history,
maybe they're trying to stop the onrush of nuclear war because maybe that would damage them eventually. Maybe they've been through that already. Maybe they've seen that on other planets. It's a remarkable uptick, or it's a remarkable uptick in reporting of these UAPs. Which is it in your view, Johnny? Have these craft always been buzzing around, or is there something specific about this moment?
I think both, certainly. So I think they've always been around, probably since the 1940s, 50s, when nuclear bombs started going at a certain level of rate. But I like to think of it as, you know, maybe they're quarantining us. You know, prehistory, ayahuasca, all of that kind of thing. Egyptian periods, talk of, you know, encounters with other beings. And a friend of mine said to me the other day, he said, hey, you know, well, just as I've just said, he said, you know, they're quarantining us, dude. They're making sure that we don't, they're making sure that we can reconnect.
Yeah.
And, George, you know,
a third option, of course,
leave it on that.
Johnny, yeah. A third option, of course, is that it's all a hoax to distract attention from some of the very pressing issues at home. Let me take Paul in Brighton on MOATS on the show. Go ahead, Paul.
A honour and a real pleasure to talk to you.
Paul,
you are the phenomenon. The MOATS family and yourself.
Thank you.
Well, with your hat.
Thank you.
The way you come across, you're the most articulated politician that this earth has ever seen. The MOATS family will continue. The online chat is getting a little bit out of hand sometimes, but we're keeping on top of that. Just keep doing what you're doing. The phenomenon will grow and grow and grow and grow. The people that don't grow,
God willing,
the people that don't grow are the people that we're talking about. And they should be ashamed of themselves. And not only that, let's all be fair with this. They all get paid to do a job. And they're failing. Just don't lose the way you are, my friend, because you are the phenomenon and you are a true inspiration. I mean it, truly. And thank you.
What a beautiful call. Beautiful call. Thank you, Paul. I wish my children to hear it. It moved me greatly. Some comments. Matthew Wren says the French owners of the British vehicle manufacturer Vauxhall have said they're closing the Luton plant and transferring the work to France. The Luton plant has been in existence since 1905. And Pinko de Gallo says the Zionists are failing at military expansion, as badly as the NATOists. And Rachel Thompson says, when rich people die in war, war stops quickly. And Arcane Eclectic, what a great name, says you can't spell Israel without liars. Well, my good wife is in the studio. Gayatri, what's rattling?
I also want to say, you also can't write Israel without driving it to hell. So, the ceasefire, it has brought about quite some discussions. Most people, according to the poll, they don't trust Netanyahu. They just believe he is needing the time to replenish, right? We have Jamal Yassin saying Israel ran out of ammunition and soldiers to fight. It is temporary ceasefire, but Israel will resume the conflict, making an excuse that Hezbollah broke the promise. This is a repeated commentary, and it's funny that today came the news from Ukraine that they're lowering the fighting age to 18 from 25 because they are also seeming to have difficulties to get their soldiers on the front line.
1 million potential soldiers of the Ukraine army have left the country, and we're keeping them.
And
we're
trying.
giving them houses and benefits, and they occasionally turn up at the odd casino, bordello, beach in southern Europe, driving the top-of-the-range cars. None of them are going to serve in the Ukraine military. So Biden has demanded that they begin to draft 18-year-olds.
Yes, because otherwise they'll have to, with force, keep the fighting age men in the country. You've seen the videos. People are trying to get away, and it's abuse. It's really, really horrendous.
You're never too young to die for the American empire.
Truth Soldier says, when Churchill wanted to boost English support for war in 1940, he bombed residential areas in Berlin to provoke retaliation by Hitler, who had refrained from targeting civilians in London. The strategy worked, and the Luftwaffe bombed London. Now, is Netanyahu committing atrocities in Lebanon to invite retaliation for political reason and because he wants to draw the US and the UK into a war with Iran? Will Israel survive the misrule of this bloodthirsty madman?
Well, that's historical revisionism, of course, to whitewash Hitler and the Nazis. They had refrained from bombing us. They were provoked into bombing us by Winston Churchill. This is the subtext, sub-narrative of sympathizers with Nazism, who argued that the war needn't have been fought. Hitler quite liked us. It was Churchill's belligerence that made it all turn so nasty. It's quite funny because Netanyahu is guilty of the reverse side of that coin. He argues that Hitler didn't want to massacre the Jews until it was a Muslim who persuaded him to do so. It's odd, this historical revisionism. You never know where it's going to end.
Now, speaking of Muslim, the other side of the ceasefire story is that people are arguing or accusing Lebanon of leaving behind Gaza, right? Palestine. I've seen this on the social media. And this comes on the back of this outrageous and super dangerous commentary that Senator Lindsey Graham, back to him again, made, obviously in the Senate, in his call to defeat the Shia Muslims, specifically.
Oh, did he?
Yes, he actually says that the Shiites have a doctrine in which they are compelled to kill all the Jews. It is a commandment from God. I'm quoting him here from the Senate floor. And then he continues
what about
saying...
all the Jews in Iran?
Of which there are many, exactly.
The largest Jewish community anywhere outside of the United States and Israel is in Iran. They've got hundreds of thousands of Jews in Iran, living very well and very peacefully. Lindsay, stick that up your corset. You know what I mean.
And if you don't, check our last episode of the social media rounds. But I just saw a video of the great Gideon Levy from the HIATUS saying that Israel didn't achieve anything in this war in this past year, and it will not achieve anything in the war in Gaza. And this is on the back of the ceasefire that we're discussing.
HIATUS is now persona non grata in Israel. All government ads have been pulled from the newspaper. It'll soon be a crime to write for it and a crime to read it.
Read it, exactly.
But it's the only democracy in the Middle East, you know.
So here this is from Cal in Stoke-on-Trent. George, it seems to me it's the beginning of the end. Now, how have we let these lunatics get away with destroying all the lives on Earth? These billionaires, so-called leaders from hell, are finally going to kill us all. To give Ukraine tactical nuclear weapons is beyond belief. If you do have another MOATS in heaven, I will surely be in the front seat. Personally, I think this show will start in 2025. God bless us all.
Well, thanks, I think. There are no Ukrainian nuclear weapons. There never were. They were all the property of the Soviet Union, and they were all taken back by the successor state to the Soviet Union, namely the Russian Federation. So when you read that the West is thinking of giving Ukraine back its nuclear weapons, know that that is a lie. What they're really talking about is giving our nuclear weapons to Ukraine. Now, do I believe that's going to happen? I'm sorry, I don't. I cannot think that the ruling elite in the Western countries actually literally wants to die, wants their economic system to be in complete ruins, want their children to choke in a nuclear winter, want never to sell another can of Coke, never to sell another McDonald's burger, wants never to sell another car. I don't believe that. So the ruling elite, if they are the ruling elite, will stop our politicians from handing little Zelensky, the man who plays the piano with his penis on television, the triggers for nuclear weapons. I don't believe that's going to happen. Thanks, Gayatri. I'm not going to take you for chips tonight because they're too fattening, but I'm going to watch some Netflix with you. We are watching The Day of the Jackal. Isn't it sensational?
Incredible.
I've written to the writer, Ronan Bennett, to ask if he will appear on the Mother of All talk shows to talk about his work. He's also the man that wrote Gunpowder, which was a previous series that we talked to you about, which rewrote the history of the Gunpowder plot on the 5th of November, 1605. And a very positive rewriting it was too. But if you haven't started watching The Day of the Jackal on Sky Atlantic, you are missing yourselves. So get the television on, Gayatri, while I take Terence in Corby as the last call of the evening. Go ahead, Tel.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway, and I'm overawed. I taught lots of little kids A-level politics, but that Irene was something else. Absolutely magnificent.
Amazing.
Oh yeah,
a star
absolutely.
Is born.
I think so, and it leads me into you in a roundabout sort of way. The 2.5 million votes online means nothing to me. If we're going to go down that road, changing our government every time we change our socks, it's going to be a cowboy country, and Britain isn't like a cowboy country. There are nearly 49 million, and that's nothing. So we don't need to listen to this nonsense, as far as I'm concerned. And that's why you should be incubating the Workers' Party for the next election and get all guns a-firing. And people up and down this country, that I told lots of people, my contacts around this country, the 3 islands, you need to organise in your areas and get your own parties, because that is the only way you're going to get rid of these dirty, filthy 30%ers. And voting for these, I can't find words for it. Moving on to Israel, I think that the Polish murderer, controlled by America, has been told, you stop it now because we think Persia are going to get involved, and they don't want Persia to get involved. I love Persia. I love it with all my heart. I've studied it all my life. They are not interested in Israel, and they owe them one. And that's the real crux of the issue surrounding everything in the world today is Persia. They are clever. They've got Jews, they've got Christians, they've got Catholic friends in Tehran, actually. And, you know, This is the big one. America really, Trump's a loose cannon, we know that, but I think everybody, in a way, may benefit financially with his money being thrown everywhere. Another Trump plan, not a Marshall Plan, for Britain only. So I don't know. I'd like your opinion on those points, Mr. Galloway, please.
Well, I'm temporarily distracted by the largest spider I have ever seen crawling towards me on the floor and nobody on hand to stop it. It can go as far as it likes, maybe even right up the leg of my trousers. And so I'm a little discombobulated by that. I mean, I'm talking tropical spider size of insects. Let me turn to the 2 points that you make. I disagree strongly with you about the petition, and I'd very much like to change our government. I see no case at all for accepting that Keir Starmer is in power for the next 4.5 years, and I'm with the 2,822,135 people who have now signed a petition demanding new elections. And I do so on the basis that the Starmer government lied. They lied by commission, they lied by omission. They're doing all the things they either said that they would not do or remain silent whilst knowing that they were going to do. So because of our freezing old age pensioners, if no other reason, I demand a new general election now. And I hope everyone will sign that petition. And of course, it does not a majority make. Of course, it will not produce a general election, but it will damage the government. It will shake their confidence. It will damage their internal cohesion. The members of parliament who constitute the government are watching this petition with horror. They're looking to see the addresses of the people who are signing it, because they know that most likely any of their constituents on that petition are not going to vote for them. And let me tell you, for the vast majority of members of parliament, the vast majority, their number one and in many cases only concern is that they should themselves continue to be a member of parliament. It's nice work if you can get it. Good money. You can wear a white shirt, clean. No need for swarfiga at the end of the shift. No heavy lifting. Deep carpets. Nice upholstery. Policemen calling you sir. They don't want to lose it. And therefore, the more people who sign that petition, the more unnerved the government's MPs will become, and the more likely they are to get rid of Starmer. Now, I know they might replace Starmer with somebody even worse, but I can't allow that to stand in the way. I've been fighting to get Starmer out all the way from Batley and Spen, when I was cheated out of the parliamentary seat there in the middle of the night by black bin bags filled with ballots. It wasn't the first time that that had happened, and it wasn't the last time that that happened either, but I mustn't stray into legal territory. I don't have time to reiterate my point about the Israel-Iran confrontation, though I take my hat off to you in your erudition about Persian society. It is indeed a remarkable and wonderful society and civilization, and it always has been, even before the birth of Christ, long before the birth of Christ. Persian civilization was a thing. When the Americans hadn't even become cowboys yet. I'm talking about thousands of years before that. But I will say, and it's my last word, if Israel attacks Iran, Israel will cease to exist 13 or less minutes after it has done so. Just think about that. If we're still here, then we'll be back on Sunday. It's a very, very big show on Sunday. It's the 300th edition of this iteration of the mother of all talk shows. 400th. My wife corrects me as she usually does. It's the 400th edition of the mother of all talk shows on Sunday. And we've got some surprises planned. So be with us at 7 o'clock UK time on Sunday for the mother of all talk shows. With the caveat that we haven't all gone up in nuclear smoke. Netflix, honey,